They said I was trespassing on my own property, until I opened that dam and turned their $1 million cabin project into the world's most expensive mud pit. There I am, standing at this century-old dam wheel, watching construction equipment sink into thick black mud where Timber Lake used to be. The sound of diesel generators dying echoes across the drained lake bed while that ancient smell of exposed lake bottom, decades of buried secrets, rises in the morning air. In my hand, my grandfather's old thermos steams with coffee. Same spot he stood every morning for 30 years, back when this lake was crystal clear and the only buildings were honest cabins, not some HOA president's get-rich-quick scheme. The crew foreman is screaming into his radio about environmental disaster and federal investigation. I just take another sip and smile. But let me back up and tell you how we got here. What would you do if your HOA tried to steal your family's century-old property? Drop a comment about where you're watching from. I bet you've got HOA horror stories too. My name's Ezra Blackwood, and this story starts with 47 acres of Wisconsin lakefront that my grandfather bought in 1924 for $300 and a handshake. Back then, Timber Lake was just a lumber company's log pond, but Grandpa saw something different, a place where a man could drink his morning coffee without some busybody in designer boots telling him his dock violates community standards. I'm 52, third-generation civil engineer, and every morning for 3 years I've sat on that same weathered dock where Grandpa taught me to tie bowline knots and identify loon calls. The scent of pine sap mingles with wood smoke from the stone fireplace he built by hand, and those old dock boards still creak the same song under my boots, a sound that means home. That peace lasted exactly until Constance Pemberton moved in. Constance, blonde highlights, designer everything, smile like a shark in Lululemon, rolled up from Chicago 3 years ago with enough money to buy the biggest house on the lake and enough attitude to redesign everyone else's. Her husband Braden owns half the construction companies in 3 counties. Within 6 months, she'd sweet-talked herself into HOA president by promising to elevate property values and maintain community vision. You know the type, the kind of woman who'd complain that birds are too loud in the morning. The real trouble started when I came back from a 2-week job downstate. I'm pulling into my gravel driveway, that familiar crunch under my tires telling me I'm home, when I spot these bright orange survey stakes driven into my shoreline like tiny invasion flags. Before I can even kill the engine, here comes Constance's white Escalade, spraying gravel as she parks sideways across my driveway. She steps out wearing boots that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, waving a clipboard like it's a royal decree. Ezra, perfect timing. That practiced realtor smile could cut glass. I have wonderful news about your property. In my experience, when someone says they have wonderful news about your property, grab your wallet and run. She launches into this speech about an emergency HOA meeting. Funny how emergencies always happen when the guy who might object is conveniently out of town. Unanimous vote, she says. Community enhancement project. 120 luxury cabins transforming our underutilized shoreline into a premier lakefront destination, including my land. Your property, she says, sliding legal papers toward me with those red talons, has been selected for community donation, for the greater good. I'm holding my grandfather's deed. Ink might be faded, but those property lines are carved in stone. Every acre, every tree, every foot of waterfront that 3 generations of Blackwoods have protected. Constance, this land's been in my family since 1924. That deed's recorded at the courthouse. She waves her hand like she's shooing away a mosquito. Oh, that old survey's probably inaccurate anyway. Things change, Ezra. Progress happens. Then comes the line that tells me exactly what kind of war we're fighting. Besides, I think we can all agree your little cabin doesn't really fit our vision for Timber Lake's future. My little cabin. 4 generations of memories. The place where my dad learned to fish, where I taught my son to skip stones across water so clear you could see bass swimming 20 feet down. Not upscale enough for Princess Constance's country club fantasy. She explains the timeline like she's doing me a favor. Construction starts in 30 days, project completion in 18 months. HOA's corporate lawyers have rubber-stamped everything. Fighting it would bankrupt me before I ever saw a courtroom. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, she says, climbing back into her Escalade. The smell of her expensive perfume lingers in the pine-scented air like a chemical warning. As those taillights disappear down my gravel road, I'm remembering what Grandpa used to say while we sat on this dock. Son, sometimes you gotta fight for what's right, even when the deck's stacked against you. Especially then. Time to find out exactly what that century-old deed really says, and what it doesn't say about the rest of this lake. Constance didn't waste any time showing me exactly what kind of neighbor she planned to be. 3 days later, I'm enjoying my usual morning coffee on the dock, steam rising in the crisp air, that familiar scent of pine mixing with lake water, when this shiny pickup rumbles down my driveway. Out steps some guy in a polo shirt with Timber Lake Community Standards embroidered on the pocket. "Sir, cease that activity immediately," he announces, pointing at my coffee cup like it's radioactive. Noise complaint. About my morning coffee. Apparently my boots on the dock at 6 a.m. violated newly minted quiet hours. Amazing how those rules appeared right after our conversation about my non-compliant cabin. That was just the appetizer. Next came the dock inspection. Some clipboard warrior declared my family's century-old dock a safety hazard, violating 17 regulations that didn't exist last week. Those weathered boards that had supported 3 generations of Blackwoods, suddenly they failed to meet current load-bearing specifications. 50 grand to fix it. More than I paid for my truck. The HOA board, Constance's entire country club crew, rubber-stamped every violation. Margaret from the garden club suddenly had passionate opinions about my non-compliant shoreline vegetation. Bob from down the lake, who'd waved every morning for 3 years, now studied his shoes whenever I drove past. But here's the thing about being a civil engineer. I actually know how to read the fine print. My dad always said, when someone's trying to screw you with paperwork, the devil's in the details they hope you won't find. I spent that weekend in the county courthouse basement, breathing musty air thick with decades of forgotten bureaucracy. My yellow legal pad filled with notes, pages crackling each time I turned them, and what I found there made my coffee taste a whole lot sweeter. The HOA's incorporation papers looked like they'd been rushed through a NASCAR pit stop. Missing signatures, improper notifications. When you're grabbing someone's land, apparently you skip the legal niceties. But the real treasure was buried in my grandfather's 1924 deed, written in that flowery old legal language, riparian rights extending to the center line of said water body. Most people have no clue what riparian rights mean. I learned about them in engineering school. When you own waterfront property, you sometimes own more than the dirt under your house. Sometimes you own to the middle of the lake, sometimes the water itself, sometimes rights that make developers break out in cold sweats. While I'm photocopying deed records, someone slides an envelope under the courthouse door and vanishes. Inside were copies of environmental impact studies, the ones that were supposed to be filed before you can build 120 cabins on pristine lakefront. Keyword, supposed. Turns out federal environmental law has actual teeth, unlike HOA bylaws, the kind of teeth that come with agents who don't care about your political connections or campaign donations. So I filed a complaint with the state environmental agency. Photographs, surveys, detailed engineering analysis of watershed damage, gift-wrapped the whole case for them. Their response arrived faster than pizza delivery. Construction suspended pending full environmental review. But here's where things got interesting. When I was digging through those HOA meeting minutes, I noticed something curious about the construction bids. Braden Pemberton Construction, that would be Constance's husband, had submitted a bid that was mysteriously 20% lower than everyone else's. Funny how that works when your wife controls the contract approval process. When Constance got that environmental suspension letter, she came storming down my driveway like a tornado in Lululemon. The fake sweetness had evaporated, revealing the steel underneath. "You have no idea who you're messing with," she snarled, that manicured finger jabbing toward my chest. Her voice carried the sharp edge of someone used to getting her way through intimidation and checkbooks. "Is that a threat, Constance?" "It's a promise. This project is happening, Ezra, with or without your cooperation. Maybe you should think about what's best for your future around here." The way she said future made the hair on my neck stand up. This wasn't just about cabins anymore. This was about power, money, and what happens when someone threatens both. As her Escalade disappeared in a cloud of gravel dust, I could hear the distant rumble of bulldozers working other lots around the lake. Whatever Constance and Braden had planned, they were moving fast and cutting corners. I poured myself another cup of coffee and sat back down on those non-compliant dock boards. In the growing twilight, something glinted across the water. Construction lights from the North Shore, where crews were working past sunset. Time to find out exactly what other corners they might be cutting. Because if there's one thing I learned from Grandpa, it's that people in a hurry to get rich usually leave a trail of mistakes behind them, and I was just getting started following that trail. Constance's next move proved she'd graduated from petty harassment to full-scale psychological warfare. I woke Tuesday morning to boots crunching gravel outside my bedroom window, 3:47 a.m., not exactly coffee time. Two guys in black tactical gear were patrolling my shoreline with flashlights, claiming they were private security ensuring community safety compliance. The acrid smell of their cigarettes drifted through my screen as they stomped around like they owned the place. When I stepped onto my porch in my bathrobe, one actually told me I was creating a disturbance by turning on my porch light on my own damn property at 4 a.m. "Gentlemen," I said, "unless you're here to arrest me, you're trespassing." "We have authorization from the HOA, the taller one smirked. "Right, because HOAs totally have police powers now." By Thursday, Constance had somehow convinced the county to gate off the old access road my family had used since Eisenhower was president, a shiny new barrier with a keypad lock and a sign, "Authorized residents only." Guess whose name wasn't on that list? Now I got to drive 3 extra miles around the lake just to reach my own driveway. Nothing says community enhancement like locking out the guy you're trying to rob. The whisper campaign started immediately. At Kowalski's Hardware, where I'd bought everything from deck screws to fishing tackle for 20 years, old Pete suddenly couldn't meet my eyes. "Sorry, Ezra, can't extend credit anymore. Orders from above." At the diner, conversations died when I walked in. Karen, the waitress, the good Karen, not the HOA variety, leaned close while pouring my coffee. "Constance is telling everyone you're having a breakdown since your divorce," she whispered. "Says you might do something dangerous with all that engineering knowledge." My divorce. 2 years old and none of their business, but apparently fair game for character assassination. Funny how personal tragedy becomes ammunition when you're standing between someone and their money. Anonymous notes started appearing on my windshield. "Sell and leave. Don't make this ugly. Some battles can't be won. You know what happens when you push an engineer past his breaking point? We start looking for structural weaknesses in everything, including our enemy's plans." I spent Saturday at the Historical Society, breathing that distinctive perfume of old paper and forgotten secrets. Mrs. Henderson, the volunteer librarian who'd probably seen every scheme this town had cooked up since Vietnam, kept bringing me dusty boxes. "Terrible what they're doing to you, dear," she whispered, glancing around like the walls had ears. "But these lumber company records might interest you. Sometimes the old solutions work best." She wasn't kidding. Timber Lake wasn't always a lake. It was created in 1923 when Northwoods Lumber Company built a dam to float logs downstream. The company went belly up during the Depression, but here's where bureaucracy gets beautiful. The dam ownership was never properly transferred to anyone. It just disappeared into paperwork limbo. I'm staring at faded photographs of burly men in suspenders operating this massive wooden dam, and there are the original blueprints showing every mechanical detail. In careful engineer's handwriting, someone had noted, "Manual operation maintained for emergency flood control." The dam was still private property, abandoned and forgotten, sitting there like a loaded gun nobody remembered they owned. My dad used to say, "Sometimes the best solutions are hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone smart enough to notice them." Do you? He was talking about engineering problems, but apparently it applied to revenge too. Monday morning found me at the State Revenue Office, following a paper trail through 3 departments and 4 cups of increasingly bitter coffee. The clerk, bless her bureaucratic soul, finally located the dam's tax record buried in a filing cabinet that probably hadn't been opened since Clinton was president. Northwoods Dam, oh my. "Sir, this property has $847 in unpaid taxes dating back 15 years. Wisconsin law allows purchase for the tax amount owed. Are you interested?" $847. I'd spent more than that on dinner in Chicago. But the real beauty was in those engineering specifications. The dam could legally lower lake levels by 8 feet without violating flood control regulations. 8 feet would expose every foundation Constance's crews had poured, turning their construction site into a very expensive mud pit. More interesting, it would expose whatever secrets were buried under 70 years of lake bottom sediment. When I got home, there was another note tucked under my windshield wiper. "Final warning, take the offer and disappear." I looked across the water at construction lights blazing on the north shore, crews working around the clock to beat some mysterious deadline. Then I looked at the dam deed in my truck's glove compartment, my signature still wet on the purchase agreement. Time to show Constance what happens when you corner someone who actually understands how water works. Constance's final chess move came with the subtle grace of a sledgehammer through a stained glass window. Wednesday morning, I'm drinking coffee on my non-compliant dock when this black sedan pulls into my driveway. Out steps a guy in an expensive suit carrying a briefcase and the kind of smile that makes honest people check their wallets. "Mr. Blackwood? I'm attorney Winston Carlisle, representing the Timber Lake Homeowners Association. I have a restraining order preventing you from interfering with legitimate community development." He slides the papers across my dock railing like he's dealing cards. Apparently I'd threatened critical infrastructure and posed a clear and present danger to community welfare. News to me, but there it was in legal black and white. The kicker? I was now legally prohibited from operating, tampering with, or even approaching any water control structures within the township. Someone had done their homework and figured out I owned the dam. "This is temporary, of course," Carlisle said, his voice carrying that practiced lawyer smugness. "Just until we can resolve this misunderstanding." Right. A misunderstanding worth $1 million restraining order. But Constance wasn't done flexing her political muscles. By Thursday afternoon, bulldozers were clearing trees on what was definitely my property, century-old oaks that had watched this lake grow from a lumber pond to pristine wilderness. The sound of chainsaws echoed across the water like mechanical screams. I called the sheriff, got voicemail. I called the county supervisor. "We'll look into it." I called the state environmental office. "Sir, we're still processing your complaint." Meanwhile, those oaks, trees my grandfather had climbed as a boy, crashed into the lake with splashes that sent waves lapping against my dock. The water turned brown with churned-up sediment, and by evening, dead fish were floating belly up near my shoreline. The smell hit you first, that sickly sweet stench of ecological disaster mixed with diesel fuel and fresh-cut timber. Construction runoff was turning Timber Lake into a toxic soup. That night, sitting on my dock with a bourbon and the sound of generators humming across the water, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my dad died. Complete helplessness. Here I was, a guy who'd built bridges and designed water treatment systems, watching my family's legacy get bulldozed by money and corruption. I picked up my grandfather's photograph from the side table, him standing on this same dock in 1955 holding a base that was probably swimming in cleaner water than we had now. He'd taught me that some things were worth fighting for, even when the deck was stacked against you. Especially then. Friday morning brought another visit from Carlisle, this time with a sheriff's deputy in tow. Emergency court hearing scheduled for Monday afternoon. They wanted an injunction to make my restraining order permanent. "Judge Martinez is very concerned about public safety," Carlisle explained with that reptilian smile, "particularly regarding aging infrastructure operated by emotionally compromised individuals." Emotionally compromised, Nali. That was their angle. Paint me as the crazy guy whose divorce turned him into a domestic terrorist with a dam. But while they were busy character assassinating me in court papers, I was learning some interesting things about my new property. Those 1923 engineering specs weren't just blueprints. They were a manual for controlled environmental justice. The dam's design was elegant in its simplicity. Lower the lake 8 feet, and you'd expose construction foundations while maintaining downstream flow for environmental protection. But lower at 12 feet, well, that would expose whatever industrial waste previous developers had dumped in the deep water over the decades. I spent the weekend testing the dam's manual controls under cover of pre-dawn darkness, learning the feel of those brass wheels and the sound of water rushing through opened gates. The metallic taste of stress and sleepless nights had become my constant companion, but those cold steel controls under my palms felt like hope. Sunday evening, I got a call from my son Derek in Minneapolis. "Dad, I saw the news online. Are you okay? Mom says you're obsessing over this property thing." "I'm fine, son. Just protecting what your great-grandfather built." "But is it worth all this? Maybe you should just take their money and buy something else." I looked across the lake at the construction lights blazing through the night, crews working around the clock to pour foundations before Monday's court hearing. "Some things aren't for sale, Derek. Someday you'll understand." After we hung up, I sat on the dock listening to those generators hum their mechanical lullaby. In 18 hours, they'd ask a judge to strip away my right to operate the dam, but they'd made one crucial mistake in their legal strategy. Court was scheduled for 2 p.m. Monday. The dam didn't have business hours. Time to show them what clear and present danger really looked like. Sunday night, while Constance was probably polishing her court testimony, Delilah Santos from the County Herald called with news that changed everything. Ezra, you need to hear this. Her voice carried that electric excitement of a reporter who'd struck gold. I've been digging into the Pemberton's finances for my story, and holy shit. Sorry, holy cow, they're broke. Broke. The woman with the designer boots and million-dollar development schemes was financially underwater. Delilah had spent weeks following paper trails through shell companies and offshore accounts. Turns out Constance's previous developments in Illinois had bankrupted spectacularly. Environmental lawsuits, cost overruns, and at least one project that literally sank into contaminated soil. She's borrowed against everything, Delilah explained. Their house, Braden's equipment, even her mother's retirement account. This cabin project isn't just their golden opportunity, it's their only way to avoid complete financial ruin. But the real bombshell came when Delilah started investigating the HOA's emergency powers clause that Constance had used to steamroll the property grab. I called every homeowner on the lake, Delilah said. Guess what? Half of them never got notification about that emergency meeting. State law requires 60-day written notice to all property owners for any vote involving eminent domain or property transfer. The entire vote was illegal. Every signature, every approval, every legal document they'd waved in my face. Worthless paper backed by nothing but Constance's desperation and expensive lawyers. There's more, Delilah continued. Remember that environmental complaint you filed? Well, it triggered an automatic records search. The EPA found something interesting about Timber Lake's history. My dam wasn't just a tool for lowering water levels, it was the key to unlocking decades of buried evidence. The original lumber company hadn't just cut trees. They'd dumped industrial waste, chemicals, and construction debris directly into the lake. When subsequent developers needed to dispose of inconvenient materials, they followed the same pattern: lower the water level enough, and all those secrets would surface like bloated corpses. The EPA suspects we're looking at a potential Superfund site, Delilah explained. If contamination is confirmed, the federal government takes control. No development, no construction, no exceptions. They'll spend years cleaning up the mess, and guess who gets stuck with the bill? Previous property owners, current developers, anyone who'd ever touched the contaminated land. Suddenly, Constance's rush to pour foundations made perfect sense. She wasn't just building cabins, she was racing against time before someone discovered the environmental time bomb sitting under her million-dollar dreams. Federal environmental law doesn't care about your financial problems or political connections. Contamination creates automatic liability that follows you forever, crushing property values and generating cleanup costs that could reach millions. Here's the beautiful part, Delilah continued. The moment contamination is officially confirmed, all construction bonds and insurance policies become void. Braden's company would be personally liable for every dollar of environmental damage, past and present. I'm sitting on my dock, phone pressed to my ear, watching those construction lights burn across the water while understanding finally dawned. Constance wasn't just stealing my land, she was using it as collateral in a desperate gamble to avoid bankruptcy. But environmental crimes have a way of surfacing eventually, like oil slicks that can't stay hidden forever. When's your court hearing? Delilah asked. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. Perfect timing. I'm filing my expose tomorrow morning, and I've already contacted 3 environmental groups about attending your hearing. Judge Martinez hates media circuses, but she loves public accountability. After hanging up, I sat in the growing darkness, listening to the sound of generators and heavy machinery working through the night. Constance thought she was building her financial salvation, but she was actually constructing her own environmental prison. Time to help her finish the job. Monday morning at 5 a.m., my kitchen table looked like a war room. Coffee brewing, phone charging, and 3 laptops open to different government databases. Time to turn Delilah's intelligence into actionable strategy. First call went to Jasper Tooley, retired park ranger who'd been watching this environmental disaster unfold with the quiet fury of someone who'd spent 40 years protecting wilderness from exactly this kind of greed. Jasper, I need documentation. Every environmental violation, every dead fish, every gallon of toxic runoff. His gravelly voice carried satisfaction. Son, I've been photographing their mess since day one. Got pictures of them dumping concrete directly into spawning beds, chemicals leaching into groundwater, and sediment plumes that killed 3 generations of bass fingerlings. Jasper had contacts throughout the EPA's regional office, guys who'd rather spend their careers prosecuting environmental criminals than shuffling paperwork. Real enforcement agents who understood that some contamination sites were too dangerous to ignore. I'll have federal inspectors here by Wednesday, he promised. But you need to give them something dramatic to look at. That's where the dam came in. Next, I called Camden Cross, the environmental lawyer who'd been itching to take on a high-profile case against corrupt developers. His pro bono work had shut down 3 illegal developments in the past 5 years, and Constance's scheme had all the elements he loved: political corruption, environmental destruction, and federal law violations. "Ezra, this is beautiful," Camden said, his voice carrying that predatory excitement of a shark smelling blood. "We're not just fighting a property dispute, we're exposing systematic environmental fraud. Federal agencies have unlimited resources for cases like this." Camden's strategy was elegant: file simultaneous lawsuits in federal and state courts, citing violations of the Clean Water Act, the National Environmental Policy Act, and Wisconsin's environmental protection statutes. Create so much legal paperwork that Constance's lawyers would spend months just reading our complaints. "The beauty of environmental law," Camden explained, "is that ignorance isn't a defense. If you contaminate public waterways, you're liable regardless of intent or previous ownership." But legal strategy was just the foundation. We needed public pressure, media coverage, and political accountability that would make this case too visible to bury in bureaucratic delays. Delilah had already coordinated with 3 environmental groups and 2 investigative reporters from Milwaukee. Her morning exposé would hit every local news outlet simultaneously, creating the kind of media firestorm that politicians feared more than campaign finance violations. "I've got drone footage of the contamination, recorded phone calls of Constance trying to bribe county officials, and financial documents showing the Pemberton's shell game," Delilah reported. "This story writes itself." The technical aspects required more delicate coordination. I'd studied those 1923 dam specifications until I could operate the controls blindfolded. The key was precise water level management. Drop it exactly 8 feet to expose construction foundations, then another 4 feet to reveal the buried contamination without violating downstream flood control regulations. Modern environmental monitoring had given me tools my grandfather never dreamed of. Jasper's contact at the university had provided water quality sensors that would document contamination levels in real time as the lake level dropped. Every toxin, every chemical signature, every piece of evidence would be recorded automatically. "The EPA loves hard data," Camden explained. "Give them irrefutable proof of contamination, and they'll move heaven and earth to prosecute." Community support was building organically. Buck Morrison, the upstream landowner whose water rights were being affected by Constance's construction, had rallied 5 other property owners who'd never received legal notification about the HOA vote. Their joint lawsuit would challenge the development's fundamental legal authority. "We've got standing, we've got damages, and we've got evidence of procedural violations," Buck reported. "Even if they win on environmental grounds, we can stop them on basic property law." The timing had to be surgical. Court hearing at 2 p.m. with Constance expecting to get her permanent injunction against dam operation. But federal environmental law supersedes local court orders, and contamination discovery triggers automatic construction moratoriums that no judge can override. My plan was simple: begin controlled water drainage at dawn, expose the contamination before the court hearing, and let federal law enforcement take control of the situation. By the time Constance's lawyers finished arguing about restraining orders, the EPA would have jurisdiction over the entire lake. "One thing worries me," Camden warned. "Desperate people do desperate things. If Constance realizes her scheme is collapsing, she might try something dangerous." I thought about those security guards prowling my property, the anonymous threats, the systematic intimidation campaign. Constance had already shown she was willing to bend laws and pressure officials. Cornered animals were capable of anything. "I'll be careful," I promised. "But this ends tomorrow, one way or another." As I finished my second pot of coffee, watching construction lights burn across the water, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks: control. For the first time since this nightmare started, I wasn't reacting to Constance's moves. I was making mine. Constance's desperation hit like a Category 5 hurricane at 3 a.m. Tuesday morning. I woke to the sound of bolt cutters working on my gate, that distinctive metallic snap that means someone's not planning to knock politely. Through my bedroom window, I could see flashlight beams dancing around the dam structure, and the acrid smell of cutting torch sparks drifted through the pine-scented air. 3 guys in dark clothing were trying to disable the dam's manual controls, probably figuring they could sabotage the mechanism before I had a chance to use it. What they didn't count on was Jasper's volunteer security detail, retired military guys who'd been taking shifts watching my property since the threat started. "Hey," Jasper's voice boomed across the water. "You boys lost?" The sound of scrambling footsteps and slamming car doors told me they weren't planning to stick around for introductions. By the time I pulled on boots and grabbed a flashlight, they were gone, leaving behind cut fence wire and scorch marks on the dam housing. But Constance was just getting warmed up. Tuesday morning brought a visit from the county building inspector, the same guy who'd rubber-stamped every HOA violation against my property. This time, he had new concerns about my aging electrical systems and potential fire hazards that required immediate professional inspection. Cost $12,000, payable in advance with work to be performed by county-approved contractors only. Funny thing about those approved contractors, they were all mysteriously booked solid for the next 6 months. "Safety first, Mr. Blackwood," the inspector said with a straight face. "We can't have dangerous conditions threatening the community." The community, right. The same community that was dumping construction chemicals into our drinking water. When that didn't work, Constance played her media card. By Wednesday afternoon, the local paper ran a front-page story about my increasingly erratic behavior and obsession with controlling water levels that could endanger downstream residents. The article quoted anonymous sources, probably Constance's book club, expressing concern about my mental state since my divorce. Apparently, I'd been spotted talking to myself during walks around the lake and acting aggressively toward construction workers. The talking to myself was actually phone calls with Camden, and the aggressive behavior was asking crews to stop dumping concrete directly into fish spawning areas. But facts have never been journalism's strong suit when there's a narrative to sell. But the real masterpiece was Constance's attempted bribery of Judge Martinez's clerk. Delilah caught it on a hidden camera, thanks to the clerk suspicious about an unsolicited lunch invitation from a woman she'd never met. There was Constance in a downtown restaurant explaining how a small administrative fee could ensure my court case received proper consideration. "Environmental extremists can be so litigious," Constance explained over salmon and white wine. "Sometimes the system needs help protecting reasonable development from frivolous complaints." The clerk, bless her honest heart, played along just long enough to get Constance's offer on tape. $5,000 to delay my hearing until after construction was completed. Not enough to buy a judge, but plenty to purchase some convenient scheduling conflicts. When that failed, Constance tried going directly to my bank. Thursday morning, I got a call from my loan officer explaining that concerns had been raised about my financial stability and ability to maintain current credit agreements. Someone had suggested I was facing significant legal expenses that might affect my payment capacity. "We're not calling the loan," he assured me nervously, "but we need updated financial statements and a psychiatric evaluation before we can approve any new credit applications." A psychiatric evaluation to maintain my checking account. While Constance was busy character assassinating me, her construction crews were working around the clock to beat some invisible deadline. Floodlights turned night into artificial day, and the constant rumble of heavy machinery had every loon on the lake heading for quieter waters. But here's what desperation makes you do. It makes you sloppy. Buck Morrison's trail cameras caught Braden's crews dumping something into the lake at 2 a.m. Wednesday night. 50-gallon drums with chemical company logos rolled off a flatbed truck and pushed into deep water near the North Shore. The footage was crystal clear, hazmat labels, EPA violation stickers, and Braden himself directing the operation while checking his watch like a man running out of time. They're not just hiding old contamination, Camden realized when he saw the video. They're creating new contamination to muddy the waters about who's responsible for what. Smart strategy if you're completely sociopathic. Dump fresh chemicals on top of old waste, then claim any contamination discovered was recent and accidental rather than decades-old systematic dumping. But environmental forensics can distinguish between old and new contamination through chemical aging and sediment layer analysis. Trying to hide evidence by creating more evidence was like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. Friday evening, 36 hours before my court hearing, Constance made her final desperate play. The county sheriff delivered an emergency psychiatric hold order, signed by a judge in the next county over, one who'd apparently never seen my case file but had received very convincing testimony about my deteriorating mental state and threats against public infrastructure. 12 hours in county lockup for psychological evaluation, just long enough to miss the court hearing that would strip away my damn operating rights forever. Almost worked, too. The psychiatric hold gambit almost worked, keyword being almost. Camden Cross had been expecting something like this. When you corner desperate people with federal environmental charges looming, they tend to get creative with legal technicalities. He'd already filed emergency motions challenging the hold order's jurisdiction and requesting immediate psychiatric evaluation by an independent doctor. Dr. Patricia Hawkins, a forensic psychiatrist who specialized in competency evaluations, showed up at the county jail Saturday morning with a briefcase full of standardized tests and 0 patience for political theater. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, settling into the interview room's plastic chair, "I've reviewed your case file, and frankly, this evaluation request reads like someone's legal Hail Mary. Let's get through this quickly so you can deal with your actual problems." 3 hours of cognitive tests, personality assessments, and detailed interviews about my mental state, family history, and response to stress. Dr. Hawkins documented everything with clinical precision, occasionally raising an eyebrow at particularly creative accusations in Constance's sworn statement. "According to this affidavit, you've been observed talking to invisible companions and exhibiting paranoid fixation on water control systems," she noted dryly. "The invisible companions were phone calls, I assume. Unless you count my grandfather's ghost telling me to fight for our land." She actually smiled at that. "Mr. Blackwood, you're dealing with extraordinary stress in a completely rational manner. This hold order is medically baseless and legally questionable. I'll have my report filed within the hour." By Saturday afternoon, I was free with a clean bill of mental health and documentation that Constance's psychiatric claims were fabricated. But the real victory came when Camden discovered who had signed the emergency hold order, Judge William Thornton from Dane County, who happened to be Braden Pemberton's golf partner and had received generous campaign contributions from 3 companies in Constance's development consortium. "This isn't just corruption," Camden explained, his voice carrying the predatory satisfaction of a prosecutor who'd been handed a smoking gun. "This is conspiracy to abuse the judicial system for personal gain. Federal crime, career-ending, prison time level stupid." While I was getting psychologically evaluated, Delilah's expose had hit every major news outlet in Wisconsin. Her investigation revealed the full scope of Constance's scheme: shell companies, bribed officials, environmental cover-ups, and systematic intimidation of property owners who stood in the way of profit. The story went viral on social media, complete with drone footage of toxic waste drums being dumped into pristine lake water. Timber Lake's scandal was trending statewide, and environmental groups from Chicago to Minneapolis were demanding federal investigation. But Constance wasn't finished fighting. Sunday morning brought her final, most desperate gambit: attempted purchase of water rights from the county through an emergency weekend session she'd somehow convinced 3 commissioners to attend. Emergency flood control measures, she called it, claiming my dam operation posed imminent danger to downstream communities and required county intervention. If they could claim eminent domain over the dam itself, my ownership would become irrelevant. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. Sunday in the courthouse basement, with minimal public notice and no media allowed. Classic small-town corruption. Make the important decisions when nobody's watching. Except Buck Morrison had been tracking county meeting schedules, and Jasper had contacts throughout the bureaucracy who didn't appreciate weekend corruption sessions. By 9:45 a.m., the courthouse steps were packed with environmental protesters, property rights activists, and 3 news crews who'd somehow gotten wind of the secret meeting. Signs reading "Stop Environmental Crime" and "Investigate Pemberton Corruption" filled the small plaza. Judge Martinez herself showed up, having been alerted by her clerk about Constance's bribery attempt and the questionable timing of this emergency session. Federal judges don't appreciate local politics interfering with their court schedules. "Gentlemen," she announced to the 3 commissioners, "any decisions made regarding water rights or dam operation will be immediately challenged in federal court as interfering with ongoing environmental investigation. I suggest you table this discussion until proper legal procedures are followed." The meeting lasted 15 minutes and accomplished exactly nothing, except generating more negative publicity for Constance's increasingly desperate situation. Sunday evening, as I sat on my dock preparing for Monday's court hearing, the construction lights across the lake burned brighter than ever. Crews were working triple shifts now, pouring foundation concrete faster than environmental inspectors could document violations. But desperation makes people sloppy, and Constance's crew had made a critical error. In their rush to beat federal intervention, they'd started building foundations below the lake's natural water line, the area that would be exposed when I lowered the water level. Those foundations would become evidence exhibits the moment EPA investigators saw them. My phone buzzed with a text from Camden. Federal environmental team arrives tomorrow 6 a.m. Timing is everything now. I looked across the water at those construction lights, then down at the dam keys in my palm, brass and steel, worn smooth by my grandfather's hands and now warm from mine. Tomorrow morning, Constance would learn the difference between having money and having leverage. Time to teach her about water dynamics and environmental justice. Monday morning, 5:30 a.m. The brass wheels of the dam felt cold under my palms as I began what my grandfather would have called letting the truth rise to the surface. The sound of rushing water echoed across Timber Lake as 80 years of accumulated secrets prepared to see daylight. I'd calculated the drainage rate precisely. 8 feet in 4 hours, exposing construction foundations while maintaining downstream flow for safety. Across the lake, construction crews were arriving for another day of foundation pouring, their diesel engines coughing to life in the pre-dawn darkness. The foreman's radio chatter carried across the water as they realized something was terribly wrong. Water levels dropping fast. Shut down the concrete trucks. By 7 a.m., Constance's million-dollar construction site was transforming into an environmental crime scene. Exposed lake bottom revealed decades of buried industrial waste, rusted machinery, chemical drums, concrete chunks, and a rainbow sheen of petroleum products that had been hidden under 70 years of sediment. The smell hit you first, that toxic cocktail of rotting organics and industrial chemicals that makes your throat burn and your eyes water. This wasn't just contamination. This was an environmental disaster that had been festering in the dark while Constance built her dreams on top of it. Federal EPA agents arrived at 8 a.m. sharp, just as Jasper had promised. 3 black SUVs and a mobile testing lab that looked like something from a science fiction movie. Dr. Sarah Bennett, the lead environmental scientist, took one look at the exposed contamination and immediately declared the entire area a federal investigation site. Jesus Christ, she muttered, snapping photographs of chemical drums with faded hazmat labels. This is a Superfund site waiting to happen. Delilah's news crews were documenting everything. Drone footage of the toxic wasteland, interviews with EPA agents, and real-time water quality readings that showed contamination levels spiking as buried waste was exposed to air and water. But the real show started when Constance arrived. Her white Escalade came roaring down the access road at 8:30, gravel spraying as she hit the brakes near the dam. She stumbled out wearing designer jeans and a panic-stricken expression, her usual composure shattered by the sight of her project drowning in toxic mud. "You can't do this!" she screamed, pointing an accusatory finger at me while news cameras rolled. "That dam operation is illegal. I have a restraining order." "Actually, ma'am," Dr. Bennett interrupted, stepping between us with the calm authority of someone who'd shut down more illegal developments than Constance had built. "Mr. Blackwood is operating under Federal Environmental Protection Authority. Your local restraining order is superseded by federal jurisdiction." The color drained from Constance's face as the implications hit her. Federal jurisdiction meant federal prosecution, federal penalties, and federal prison time for environmental crimes. "This contamination didn't come from our project," she said desperately, her voice cracking. "It was already here. We're the victims." That's when Buck Morrison stepped forward with his trail camera footage, showing Braden's crews dumping fresh chemical drums just 3 nights earlier. "Mrs. Pemberton," Dr. Bennett said, reviewing the video on Buck's phone, "environmental forensics can distinguish between historical contamination and recent dumping. What we're seeing here appears to be both." The crowd was growing by the minute. Environmental activists, property owners, concerned citizens, and 3 news crews broadcasting live coverage of Wisconsin's newest environmental scandal. The courthouse steps had become an impromptu town hall with people demanding answers about decades of regulatory failure. Judge Martinez arrived at 9 a.m., surveying the chaos with the weary expression of someone who'd seen too many corruption cases in small-town politics. "Well," she announced to the assembled crowd, "I think we can cancel this afternoon's court hearing. Federal environmental law takes precedence over local restraining orders." That's when Constance made her final, desperate play. "You're all being manipulated," she shouted, her voice carrying that shrill edge of someone whose carefully constructed world was collapsing in real time. This man is a domestic terrorist who's destroyed our community's economic future out of spite and mental illness." The crowd fell silent. News cameras zoomed in. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the mic drop confrontation between David and Goliath. I walked slowly toward Constance, holding the original 1924 dam deed and the EPA contamination report that Dr. Bennett had just handed me. "Constance," I said, my voice carrying across the water loud enough for every camera to capture, "I didn't create this contamination. I just lowered the water level enough to expose what you and your friends have been hiding for decades." I held up the deed. "This dam has been protecting this lake's water quality for a century. Your project would have built luxury cabins directly on top of a toxic waste dump, selling families properties that would have poisoned their children." The crowd erupted. Reporters surged forward. Camera flashes popped like 4th of July fireworks. And Constance Pemberton, HOA president and would-be environmental criminal, was led away in handcuffs by federal agents while her husband's construction equipment sat stranded in toxic mud that would take years and millions of dollars to clean up properly. Justice has a sound, and it sounds like water flowing freely after decades of artificial constraints. 18 months later, I'm sitting on my dock drinking morning coffee from my grandfather's thermos, watching loons dive in water cleaner than it's been since the 1920s. The federal cleanup transformed Timber Lake into a showcase of environmental restoration. $2.3 million in Superfund money removed 40 years of buried contamination, while university researchers turned the project into a living laboratory for ecological recovery. Constance got 3 years in federal prison for environmental conspiracy, bribery, and fraud. Her husband Braden lost his construction license permanently and filed bankruptcy when the cleanup costs exceeded his insurance coverage by about $2 million. Their house, the biggest one on the lake, sold at auction for 30 cents on the dollar. The HOA got disbanded and reformed with an environmental protection mandate that actually means something. Buck Morrison became president, and their first official act was establishing a 10-year development moratorium to protect the watershed while nature healed itself. Property values around the lake increased 20% once the EPA certified the water as clean. Turns out people pay premium prices for pristine environments, not luxury cabins built on toxic waste. But the real victory was watching my son Derek bring his kids up here last summer. 3 generations fishing from the same dock, teaching the same lessons about conservation and fighting for what's right. My granddaughter caught her first bass in water so clear you could see the bottom at 15 feet. The dam became a historical landmark with an interpretive trail explaining how citizen action and environmental law can protect natural resources from corporate greed. School groups visit regularly to learn about water management and environmental science. I kept my engineering consulting business but added a new specialty, helping communities fight corrupt development through proper environmental enforcement. Turns out there are a lot of Constances out there, and they all make the same mistakes when they're desperate. Here's what I learned that might help you. Property research always starts with your deed. Those old documents often include rights you didn't know you owned. Tax auction properties can give you legal leverage for pennies on the dollar, especially if governments have forgotten what they're supposed to maintain. Environmental contamination creates automatic federal authority that trumps local corruption every single time. Most importantly, when someone tries to intimidate you with expensive lawyers and political connections, remember that federal environmental law protects whistleblowers and rewards people who report violations. The EPA has unlimited resources for prosecuting environmental crimes, and they love cases that come gift-wrapped with evidence. The Timber Lake Conservation Scholarship now awards $15,000 annually to students pursuing environmental engineering. We fund it through money saved during the cleanup process. Funny how federal efficiency worked better than local corruption. Every summer, we host Clean Water Days, a weekend festival celebrating environmental restoration. Families camp on the restored shoreline, kids learn about water ecology, and adults share stories about protecting natural resources for future generations. Delilah and I got married last fall, combining our skills to help communities across 3 states fight similar environmental justice battles. She investigates, I provide technical expertise, and together we've stopped 6 illegal developments and helped prosecute 4 corrupt officials. The old dam still operates perfectly, its brass wheels turning smooth as silk whenever we need to manage water levels for flood control or maintenance. Sometimes I find myself standing there at dawn, thinking about my grandfather's hands on those same controls, protecting the same water for the same reasons. conservation isn't just about preserving the past. It's about ensuring the future has something worth inheriting. That dam wheel still turns smooth as the day it was built, and I still drink my morning coffee on the dock where my grandfather taught me that some things are worth fighting for, no matter how powerful the opposition or how steep the odds. Speaking of fighting the good fight, I want to hear about your HOA nightmares. Drop a comment below about your worst homeowners association horror story. I read every single one, and they helped me choose the next environmental justice battle to investigate. And if you want to see more David versus Goliath stories where the little guy actually wins for once, hit that subscribe button. Next week, I'm telling you about the farmer who discovered his neighbor's $1 million mansion was built entirely on his land, and the brilliant way he handled that situation. Trust me, you won't want to miss how that one played out. Until then, remember, sometimes the best solutions are hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone brave enough to turn the wheel.
From all of us here at HOA Stories, thanks so much for watching today's HOA Karen Meltdown. If you enjoyed seeing neighbors stand their ground and karma catch up, smash that like button, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe so you won't miss the next HOA drama we bring you.